I didn't tell anyone I was coming. After 6 straight weeks of back-to-back meetings and one too many cold dinners alone in my apartment, I packed a weekend bag, turned off my phone, and drove north toward the only place that ever quieted my mind. The lake cabin was supposed to be empty. No one had the address except my son, Caleb, and I hadn't shared my plans with him. But as I turned onto the gravel drive, the tires crunching softly under the late autumn leaves, my stomach dropped. Caleb's black SUV was parked in front, and on my porch swing, sat Jenna, legs crossed, one hand holding a wine glass, the other twirling her hair as she laughed with a woman I instantly recognized as her mother. My feet hadn't even touched the steps before Jenna looked up, squinted, and tilted her head. "Oh, what's this parasite doing here?" she said, as if I were the one intruding. Her mother let out a high-pitched laugh. "She's early." I didn't respond. I looked toward Caleb, who stood in the doorway with his hands in his pockets, watching but not intervening, not even pretending to be surprised. "Caleb," I said quietly, "you didn't tell me you were coming up." He opened his mouth, closed it again, then looked away. "You changed the locks?" I asked, more to myself than anyone else. Jenna shrugged. "Well, we didn't expect company." The wine glass in her hand caught the sunlight. It was crystal, one of the matching set I had stored in the kitchen cabinet. I stepped back from the door, gripping my bag tighter. My eyes scanned the porch, the windows, the flower box I'd planted last spring. Everything was familiar, yet suddenly nothing felt like mine, and inside I could hear laughter. I didn't wait for permission. I pushed the door open and stepped inside. The first thing that hit me wasn't the warmth. It was the smell. Garlic, baked cheese, red wine. My kitchen smelled like a dinner party I hadn't been invited to. And in the middle of it all stood Jenna's father, barefoot, stirring something on the stove like it was his own. My living room was worse. There were jackets piled on the back of my couch, a pair of men's boots kicked off near the fireplace. The framed photo of me and Daniel, my late husband, had been moved off the mantel, replaced by a smiling family portrait of Jenna and her parents. The sight of it made my throat close. "Jenna," I said, my voice low, "what is going on?" She didn't look up from her glass. "We figured you'd moved on from this place. I mean, you never come here anymore." "That doesn't mean it's not mine." She smiled tightly. "We needed a break. Everyone's been stressed, and this place was just sitting here." Her father waved at me like we were old friends. "Hope you don't mind, Norma." "Jenna said it was all fine. Said you were retired and down in Florida or something." I looked at Caleb. He was sitting in my armchair, hands clasped, staring at the rug. "Is that what you told them?" I asked. He didn't answer. I opened the fridge. Full. Not just snacks. Meals, ingredients, beer. My cabinets had been rearranged. A pie dish that had belonged to my grandmother now held what looked like leftovers. I turned to the hallway. Through the cracked door of the guest room, I could see a suitcase. "Your clothes are in my drawers," I said flatly. Jenna crossed her legs. "If you're so sure this is yours, call the cops." She said it like a challenge. I looked at Caleb again. His eyes stayed on the floor, just like the day we buried his father, just like every time I needed him to speak up. I didn't sleep that night. The laughter from the living room faded sometime after midnight, replaced by the steady hum of the heater, my heater, running on the bill I still paid. I sat in the dark of my bedroom, surrounded by my own furniture that no longer felt like mine. At dawn, I stepped outside for air. The lake was calm, the mist low, and for a moment I almost believed everything inside that house had been a bad dream. But then a pickup pulled into the drive, and I recognized the man who climbed out. "Morning, Norma," he called cheerfully, hoisting a bundle of firewood from his truck bed. "Didn't expect to see you here again so soon. Jenna said you'd moved down to Florida." I froze. "Florida?" He nodded, oblivious to the sting behind my quiet tone. "Yeah, she told everyone you were settling in for good. We figured you lent the cabin to them for the winter. Sweet of you to do that." I managed a stiff smile and thanked him, my throat too tight to explain. He waved, dropped the wood on the porch, and drove off. Inside, I stood in this hallway and stared at the small brass hook where the spare key used to hang. It was empty, the key I'd given Caleb last year after Jenna's surgery, just in case of an emergency. I had meant it as trust, as comfort, not an invitation. Now I saw it clearly. They hadn't borrowed a home, they'd claimed one. I walked through the cabin one last time, each step heavier than the last. The photos on the walls, the sound of their voices in the kitchen, the faint smell of coffee. It all pressed down on me like I'd been written out of my own story. Without a word, I grabbed my coat and stepped outside, locking the door behind me out of habit, even though it no longer mattered. This wasn't about a key. It was about disappearing from the life I built, and I wasn't going to let that happen again. By mid-morning, I was on the highway heading into town, my hands clenched around the steering wheel. I hadn't planned to spend the day this way, but the moment that neighbor mentioned Florida, I knew what I had to do. At the library, I claimed a quiet corner, logged into my cloud account, and began pulling every file I could think of: my deed to the cabin, the updated property tax records, the original construction invoices. Then I opened the app linked to the cabin's security cameras. One of the Nest cams was still connected. I scrolled back. The footage showed them arriving a week ago, Caleb carrying a bag, Jenna fiddling with the emergency key, her parents trailing behind. No hesitation, no permission. When the printer started whirring, the sound was louder than I expected. I gathered each page, carefully stacked them into a folder, and slipped it into my bag like armor. Then I made a call. "Marlene," I said when my attorney answered, "I'm going to need your help. And no, this time it's not about zoning." Her tone shifted instantly. "Tell me everything." By the time I pulled back into the cabin's drive, the sun had dipped behind the trees. I didn't get out. I stayed in the car, hands in my lap, the engine ticking as it cooled. Through the wide front window, I could see them all gathered around the dining table like a postcard. Jenna and her mother were laughing over something. Her father poured himself another glass of wine. Caleb looked relaxed, a fork in one hand, his phone in the other. My table, my glasses, my life playing out without me. It wasn't just trespassing. It was a quiet replacement. They'd slipped into my space and acted like it had never been mine, like I was the one out of place. I didn't knock, not yet. I stayed there, still as the water behind the cabin, and waited for the next step to become clear. The envelope arrived 3 mornings later, hand-delivered by a local courier in a tan jacket who tipped his hat and asked for a signature. Jenna met him on the porch, barefoot, coffee mug in hand. She barely glanced at the envelope before tearing it open. I was standing at the edge of the driveway, pretending to check my phone. "Is this a joke?" she said loudly, waving the papers in the air. Her mother took them from her, eyes scanning the top line. "Notice to vacate," she read aloud, her voice faltering. "Filed under legal grounds of unlawful occupancy." For a second, no one moved. Then Caleb stepped out behind them, rubbing the back of his neck. "Mom, this is extreme." I met his eyes. "You changed the locks." "It was Jenna's idea," he muttered. "Don't do that!" Jenna snapped, turning on him. "You agreed!" Her mother folded the letter neatly and set it on the porch rail. "This is ridiculous. We made this place a home. You weren't using it. We've been cleaning, organizing, hosting." "Hosting," I repeated softly. "Right." Caleb stepped off this porch, lowering his voice like it would make any of this easier. "Why didn't you just talk to me first?" "I did. You didn't say a word." That silenced him. Jenna crossed her arms. "You think we're just going to leave because of a piece of paper? We'll fight this." I nodded. "Go ahead." But I saw it in her eyes. The shift, the flicker of uncertainty. She didn't expect me to push back. She'd gotten too used to my silence, my checkbook, my forgiveness. They had treated my absence like an invitation, and now they didn't know what to do with my presence. The courier's car pulled away down the road. Jenna watched it, then turned her back on me without another word. I stayed in place until the door closed behind them, and then I walked slowly toward town. The diner was nearly empty that afternoon, just the hum of the ceiling fan and the low clink of dishes from the kitchen. I sat in my usual booth by the window, the folder of printed documents beside my coffee cup, and my phone glowing softly in my hand. I opened my banking app, scrolled through the list of automatic payments, and found the one labeled Caleb, Housing Support. It had been running for almost 4 years, ever since he'd said, "We just need a little help until things settle." I pressed cancel. The confirmation message popped up, cold and final. Next came the loan account, Jenna's SUV, technically under both our names. I remembered the day she cried at the dealership because the financing fell through. Caleb had looked at me then like a boy again, silently pleading. I had co-signed without hesitation, convincing myself it was family. Now I typed a brief message to the lender. Co-owner withdraws consent. Vehicle to be repossessed under shared clause. I didn't reread it, I hit send. By the time I finished my coffee, 2 parts of my life had quietly shifted back into balance. No shouting, no scene, just numbers realigned to where they should have been all along. That night, as the sun fell behind the pines, I saw a notification flash across my screen. Remote access disabled. It meant Jenna's car wouldn't start. I could almost imagine her standing in the driveway, pressing the key fob again and again, thinking it was a glitch. By the end of the week, Caleb called from an unfamiliar number. The landlord had sent a formal warning about their lease. No rent received, no extensions. Oh, his voice on the voicemail was tight, brittle. "Mom, I don't understand what's happening." I didn't call him back. All the things they'd built, the car, the townhouse, the little comforts they flaunted, had been resting on the ground I quietly paid for. And now that ground was gone. I closed my phone, left a few dollars on the table, and walked out into the cool evening air, heading toward the courthouse. It was close to midnight when the phone rang. I almost didn't answer. The number flashed across the screen. Caleb's. I hesitated just long enough to wonder if I should let it go to voicemail, then pressed accept. "Mom," he said immediately, his voice tight and fast. "What are you doing? Jenna's freaking out." I could hear noise in the background, raised voices, a door slamming, the sound of someone pacing. He kept talking, tripping over his words, trying to fit excuses and blame into the same breath. "This isn't fair. You could have talked to me first. We didn't mean for it to go this far. Jenna's car, her job depends on it. And the rent. Why would you just cut everything off without warning?" I listened, letting his panic wash over the line. It reminded me of the calls he used to make from college, when he'd spent too much money or missed a payment. The tone hadn't changed, only the stakes. Then there was shuffling, and a new voice broke in. Jenna's. "You're punishing everyone for a misunderstanding," she snapped. "This is exactly why we didn't invite you to the housewarming. You make everything about control." I took a breath, steady and slow. "I own that house," I said. The silence on the other end was sharp, then a brittle laugh. "You're unbelievable." A click. The call ended. I sat there for a long time, staring at the dark window across from me, the reflection of my own face faint in the glass. Outside, the night was still. My phone buzzed once, a text from Caleb. "You've really made things worse." I placed the phone face down on the table. They were learning finally what dependence costs when the source stops giving. I turned off the lamp and went to bed, the faint hum of the refrigerator the only sound in the room. By morning, I knew there would be another message waiting, but it wouldn't change what was already in motion. The first notice came from the finance company, subject line, "Repossession completed." I opened the email without flinching. A photo was attached, the SUV, hood slightly dusted with pollen, being lifted onto a flatbed truck parked just outside their apartment complex, right where I knew it would be. I closed the email and moved on. Next was a message from the property manager. The subject was less dramatic, but just as final. "No rent received. Violation of lease terms. Unit now under eviction review." I stared at the screen for a moment, not because I doubted it would come, but because of how quickly it all was unraveling. Not months, days. Later that afternoon, I received one more alert from the security app. The cabin door had been opened, then closed again. An hour later, another motion ping, then nothing. When I arrived that evening, they were gone. No note, no apology, just silence. Inside, the kitchen smelled like spoiled fruit. A wine glass was broken in the sink, plates stacked with dried food. In the guest room, someone had cracked the mirror above the dresser. I didn't cry. I opened all the windows, lit the fireplace, and began cleaning, room by room. No music, no rush, just methodical care, the kind I used to give freely to people who had no idea what it cost me. In the bedroom, as I lifted the mattress to vacuum beneath the frame, something fluttered out from under it. A single sheet of lined paper. The handwriting was unmistakable. Jenna's. At the top, a heading in bold marker, future plans. Below it, baby names, housewarming invite list, change mailbox name. I stared at the last line for a long time. Not ask if we can stay, not talk to Norma, just change the name. I folded the paper once, slowly, then dropped it into the trash can with the empty wine bottles and broken glass. It didn't matter anymore. They'd made plans with things they never earned, and now those things were returning to their rightful place. 2 weeks passed before I heard from either of them again. The silence between us had grown thick, almost comfortable. I'd started sleeping through the night, waking to the sound of the lake against the dock instead of my phone buzzing on the nightstand. Then one afternoon the call came, Jenna's number. I let it ring twice before answering. Her voice was flat, stripped of all the sharpness it once carried. "We're being sued," she said, "for breaking the lease on the condo. The landlord says we abandoned the unit without notice. My parents are back in Indiana. Caleb blames me. He's sleeping on the couch." She gave a short, humorless laugh, if you can call it that. I stayed quiet, letting her fill the space. "I know you're angry," she went on, "but maybe we could reset. Start over. Forget what happened at the cabin. I just want things to be normal again." Normal. The words settled like dust. In my mind, I saw Daniel standing by the old workbench, sanding the railing for the porch we built the summer after we bought the land. He'd always said the cabin should feel alive but peaceful, a place where noise had to earn its place. I could still hear his voice. "Don't let them take that from you, Norma. Not the quiet, not the work we did." I took a slow breath. "No, Jenna," I said, "we can't reset. Some things don't go back." She didn't argue, just a small exhale on the other end like she'd expected it. "I guess that's it then," she said softly. "Goodbye," I answered. When the call ended, I didn't feel relief or anger, just stillness, the kind that comes after a storm when everything broken finally stops moving. Outside, the water was calm again. The house was mine again. And for the first time in years, that felt like enough. But the quiet never lasts long. The next call came 3 days later, this time from an unfamiliar number. The brush moved steadily in my hand, strokes even and sure, the same way Daniel taught me. The front door, now a soft olive gray, gleamed in the afternoon sun. I stepped back to admire it. No more scuff marks, no more forgotten fingerprints, just fresh color and a clean line. The air smelled of damp pine and lake wind, not a trace of perfume or smoke or wine. Inside, I'd restored what mattered. Our wedding photo was back on the mantel, the one where he stood behind me with his hands on my shoulders. The fishing trophies, still ridiculous, still his pride, lined the shelf above the window. I'd replaced the bedding in the guest room last week. No one had touched it since. There was a folded quilt at the end of the bed, the one we brought back from Maine. They hadn't even moved it. They never saw the house. Not really. I made a pot of coffee and poured a cup, then walked down to the dock. The water was still, a mirror to the sky. I sat on the bench we built together and opened my notebook. Not a journal, not today. This was the beginning of a will. I started with the cabin, its address, parcel number, tax ID. Then, in crisp, direct language, I wrote, "This property is to remain in my name until my death. Upon transfer, it may only pass to individuals who have contributed to its care. No joint titles, no emergency keys, no presumptions." I paused, then underlined that last sentence. Further down, I noted the bank accounts, the safe deposit box, and the one insurance policy I'd left unchanged since Daniel passed. Everything in clear handwriting. No more unspoken understandings. No more favors without names. Only what I chose. Only what I meant. When I finished, I tucked the pages into a folder, placed it beside me, and leaned back against the bench. The sky above the lake was cloudless. The only sound was the soft lap of water and the creak of the dock boards beneath my feet. For the first time in years, I wasn't waiting for anyone to show up. The phone on the bench beside me buzzed once, then again. I let it ring before answering. "Hello?" There was a pause, a shaky breath, then Caleb's voice, small, uncertain. "Mom." I didn't respond right away. "I know you don't want to talk to me," he said, "but I just wanted to say I'm sorry. For everything." I stayed quiet, listening to the sound of the wind move over the lake. He went on. "I should have stopped it. The cabin, the keys, all of it. I thought I was helping, but I wasn't. I just made things worse. I don't blame you for what you did. I get it now." There was a long silence. Then he added softly, "I miss Dad." Something in my chest shifted, not breaking, just loosening. "I miss him too," I said. He cleared his throat. "Jenna's gone. She moved out last week. She left a note. I think she blames me for everything, and maybe she's right." "She made her choices," I said. "Yeah, so did I." Another pause. "I don't expect you to forgive me," he said finally, "but I hope someday you will." I looked out at the water, at the reflection of the trees trembling along its surface. "Someday," I said. He didn't say anything else, just a quiet okay. And then the line clicked. I set the phone down, the ripples in the lake catching the fading sunlight. The air smelled of pine and smoke from a distant chimney. I thought of Daniel again, how he used to say forgiveness isn't a favor you give, it's the space you make to keep living. The cabin door creaked as the wind shifted. I turned back toward the house, the roofline soft against the sky. Everything was still, everything was mine. Inside, I placed the folder with my will on the desk, beside a small photo of Caleb at age 6, missing a front tooth, smiling proudly beside the first fish he ever caught. I traced the edge of the frame with my finger, then switched off the lamp. As the last light dimmed, the house felt alive again. Not crowded, not stolen, just full in a way I hadn't felt in years. That night, I slept with the windows open. The sound of the lake was steady, constant, a heartbeat of water against wood. And when morning came, I didn't wake with dread or anger or loss. I woke to quiet. Real quiet. The kind Daniel would have called peace.